Stories of women who became pregnant in their teenage years. It was horrible. I ended up in a very bad situation. My father had just committed suicide. My mother was a full-blown drug addict, pills, alcohol, cocaine. I was dating a guy who was a manipulator. We were both 17, and he convinced me that if we had a child, my mother would change and he would stop cheating on me. In the end, he kept cheating and my mother didn't change. I lost the baby at 14 weeks and found out I had von Willebrand disease, a hereditary blood disorder that affects clotting. I lost a lot of blood. My ex said I was pretending and went to a party. My mother was passed out at that time. I begged the neighbors to call an ambulance. I had to get a blood transfusion. I still have nightmares about that night, overwhelmed by a mix of grief over losing the baby and the fear of bleeding to death. When I came home, I saw my mother throwing a party. She was stressed and needed to distract herself. A month later, we found out she was pregnant, and the only time the father was around was during that party. So, technically, she got pregnant with my little sister because I had a miscarriage. When I was 18, I found out I was pregnant again 2 weeks after I was accepted into one of the best universities in the country. I still enrolled despite all the advice to go to a municipal college. I finished university, then got a master's degree, and later became a PhD candidate at another university. Over time, I reached a 6-figure salary and eventually sent my daughter to university. In short, it was difficult, but it was possible to handle it. It was a nightmare. I always felt sick, my body was exhausted, and I was afraid to tell my family. When I did, they started shaming me. By the senior years of high school, kids were already becoming cruel and gossiping. In the end, I had a miscarriage, and now every time my period starts, I remember that experience. I don't want any more children. I've closed the chapter in my life forever. I will always wonder if my decision to not have children is tied to how bad that time in my life was when I became pregnant at 15. Can you imagine being a teenager during puberty with hormones raging? It was truly a terrible experience. But this is just my story. Maybe for others, it wasn't as bad. One more thing, since my family didn't support me, they wouldn't let me talk about it after it all ended. This experience turned into a mix of depression, anxiety, guilt, and shame. It was so strong that when I told my husband about it 6 years later, I threw up. For many people, an experience like this is something you live with for the rest of your life, even if you never have children or can't have them. It's something you went through, and that experience will stay with you forever. If any of you have a teenage child, please talk to them about safe sex, pregnancy, and don't scare them so that they can approach you for help if needed. I became a mother at 13 and now I'm 21. In the beginning, it was hell. The situation at school was bad enough, and I was also a mother. I faced all sorts of bullying throughout most of my school years. My parents supported me, and thanks to them, we managed to survive. Now I live alone, and despite the terrible moments I've faced, I love my son, and he helps me keep going. I'm sorry you had to go through all of that. I hope things are better for you now. I got pregnant by accident, or more like without really understanding how it happens. I was never a curious child, and I didn't ask many questions. My parents didn't allow me to attend sex education classes in school. I ended up succumbing to pressure from the boy I liked, not understanding what was going on and feeling incredibly uncomfortable throughout the whole thing. I didn't want to do it again. Later, I started feeling nauseous in the mornings, and eventually my mother took me to the doctor where I found out I was pregnant. At first, my parents were angry with me, but later they started blaming themselves for not being more open with me. In the end, the pregnancy went fine, but it was very stressful to tell people about it. I felt nauseous all the time, and I couldn't go to school. I had to wait more than a year for child benefits, and I had to work evenings when my mother could look after my twins. I was doing everything I could to provide for them. It got better when my twins turned 1, and I got an apartment and a boyfriend who later became my husband. Now I'm pretty happy. My twins are wonderful, and it was worth going through all of this. Teenagers who don't have real problems in life can be utterly miserable. A teenager's brain naturally amplifies even the smallest problems. I had the same teenage brain, but I also lived with real problems and had to make difficult decisions. I was 18. My parents lived on the other side of the country, and my ex and I were living with a couple of roommates, sharing the rent. We were so poor that we ate 1 can of canned spaghetti a day. I didn't get any medical checkups during pregnancy, and at 6 months, I went into premature labor. I spent the rest of the pregnancy in the hospital, and I visited the hospital monthly to make sure the baby was fine. My daughter was born at full term, weighing 2.9 kilograms. Now she's 28. I most remember how I was always hungry by the end of the pregnancy. We would cook a huge pot of peas with cornbread and eat it for a whole week, sometimes with fried salted pork and fried cabbage. This was in the 80s, and getting food stamps was much harder than it is today. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. I'm 21, married with 2 kids, and now I'm trying to figure out how to survive on $2,000 a month. It was hard, but I managed to finish school. I graduated in May and gave birth in July. I got married while I was still studying. The father of the child was a good guy and a good father. I still managed to enroll in college, though only in a 2-year nursing program. I read a lot of books, and I had to grow up very fast. Instead of chasing my dreams, I chased the goal of providing a safe life for my baby. It was scary, but I was 14 when I got pregnant. I had no idea what to do, and my family shamed me, and all my friends turned their backs on me. I was terrified. I considered adoption because I knew I couldn't provide the life the child deserved. I would have been a mother at 15 if I had carried the pregnancy to full term, but in the end, I lost my son at 18 weeks. That was a huge blow for me. I tried to kill myself several times, and I was hospitalized twice. After years of therapy, I started to feel better. I still keep my son's ashes in a fireproof safe, and I think about him every day. Thanksgiving is a very difficult holiday for me, as I lost the baby the day before. I'm not sure I want to have children in the future, but who knows? I'm terribly afraid that I'll go through the same thing again. I was diagnosed with PTSD, and sometimes just the thought of having kids scares me to death. And don't forget to check out our other videos.